work for Friends of the Columbia Gorge as the Land Trust Coordinator, and I also am a coordinator for the Oregon Bee Atlas for the Gorge chapter. And I'm with Eileen.
Hi, it's great to be here this morning. I'm Eileen Garvin. I'm a writer and I live in Hood River. And my new novel, The Music of Bees, came out on April 27th. So I'm here to chat with you about bees.
Oh my gosh, I was just ordering your book actually, because I was reading yesterday an article about your book, and it sounds really fun and really cool. And it kind of reminds me of growing up a little bit. I'm not from here, but my husband's from here. He went to Hood River Valley High School, and I don't know, just hearing how you have references to Hood River and the Gorge, it's really cool to see like your town in a book.
Yeah, I suppose so. And it is very much a Hood River centric story. The three main characters, one of the three main characters goes to Hood River Valley High School. So I think that people who read the book will find a lot of familiar landmarks in it, including the orchards, which is, I'm sure, something we're going to be talking about. The main character, Alice Holtzman, is a backyard beekeeper hobbyist, and that's kind of where the plot starts, is with her honeybees, and partly grew out of my own interest with beekeeping, backyard beekeeping.
Yeah, I actually kept bees in high school. I've always been really interested in bees, so I tried it in high school. And it was short-lived because I don't know, you probably know this, but you know how when you start a hive, they're really small and docile. And then July hits, I had an internship. I was gone for a couple weeks, and they didn't remember me, and I got stung.
Oh.
And I found out I was sick. I swelled up like a balloon. No. It was really embarrassing. Oh. But so I them until there was actually an issue with them, and my neighbor took them, and so I switched to native bees after that because I am allergic.
Right. Well, and that's kind of a scary way to find out that you're allergic to bees. I'm glad you didn't have a worse outcome for that. My friends who are beekeepers, and I'm actually currently enrolled in the Oregon State University Extension Service Master Beekeeper Apprentice Program, which is a really long thing to say at 8 o'clock in the morning. And one of the things that is just kind of helpful knowledge is like keep an EpiPen around in case you have friends or kids or something that react badly. But yeah, I as you know, it sounds like from your experience, you're going to get stung at some point, and that's typically not a common occurrence, but you do want to be prepared for it. I got into beekeeping when I moved here. I've been in the Gorge for 15 years, and I got my first hive in 2014. And kind of looking for a distraction and something to do in the backyard, and really just became, the more I learned, the more fascinated I became. And as you probably know from your experience, you really can just jump in without a lot of experience. I made a lot of mistakes and learned the hard way with a lot of things, but just really, the more I worked with them, the more fascinated I became with watching their behavior, the inner workings of the hive, and reading about how they collect nectar and create honey and pollinate and all these things, which then, of course, led me to an interest in native species, which is, I'm definitely more of a honeybee person, but I've done a little bit of writing about the bumblebees in the Pacific Northwest, which I know overlaps with the Oregon Bee Atlas. And once you start looking, once you're looking in your yard at your honeybees and your plants and seeing how they work, then you start noticing these other native species. So it really is a wonderful hobby for anybody who's interested in the outdoors.
Right. Yeah, I have to say, and I won't call out who it was, but I was reading an article written about your book, and someone used a picture of it was actually a native bee, and they labeled it as a honeybee.
Oh,
yeah,
really?
It was a longhorn bee. It was a really beautiful longhorn bee, and they look so similar, so people don't really notice how diverse our native bees are out here. And it's funny to me because I think, you know, every environmentalist knows about, you know, ospreys and black bears and elk, but bees are, I feel, very unknown to people. They really think save the bee just applies to the honeybee. They don't
Right.
realize of like, I think around 500 species just in Oregon alone of native bees. And there are just, it's a whole world of basically the pollinating super animal that are holding our ecosystems together.
Right. And I think most people don't realize that honeybees aren't native to North
Right.
America. So, and honeybees are easy to love because everybody loves honey. But when you talk about the hundreds of different species of native bees in Oregon alone, could you tell me a little bit about the Oregon Bee Atlas and what you're doing with that?
Yes. So I always like to start the description by saying I went to school at Montana State University, and I did quite a few projects working for different labs on native bee populations and comparing. What we were doing was collecting bees and comparing what bees we found those summers that we caught them in like probably 2012 or 2013, and we were comparing them to bees that were collected 100 years ago.
Wow.
Because we were trying to see what was different, what was coming up because of climate change, just to compare and see what's changing with our bee populations. As we know, bee populations are declining. So we were using these older data sets to compare to what we have now. And I was surprised when I came and heard about the Oregon Bee Atlas, because what the Oregon Bee Atlas is trying to do is create that baseline data set of what bees we have in Oregon. We don't have 100-year-old data sets where someone collected bees in the 1800s. We don't have any of that. And what the Oregon State University's bee program is trying to do is collect bees using citizen scientists all over the state to create a collection that we can use for research and just an understanding of what bees are where, what they're feeding on, what flowers they're pollinating, and what time of day and what time of year they're out. So it's very valuable information for us to understand ecosystem services that these bees are providing and seeing the amazing diversity in our state.
And so when you say citizen scientists, how does that work? Who can
So it's kind of set up like the Master of Beekeeping through OSU Extension, because it's called I have never said it out loud, Master Melitologist, I think is the word. But they designed a program where anyone can learn online about bees, how to collect them, what their lives are like, what kinds of species there are, so you can identify them. And so you take the program online or in classes, depending on what year it is. And then you are trained as a collector, meaning you go out with nets. So anyone can do this. Go out with nets and collect bees in natural spaces. So preferably not your backyard, but on like public land that you're allowed on. Or for our example, at Friends of the Columbia Gorge, we have been bringing people to some of our land trust sites like Mosier Plateau, which is a trail and landscape in Mosier property, and collecting bees in the spring. We just got done. We all go out with nets and collect these bees. Unfortunately, we do have to kill them, and in a humane way, as quickly as possible. And we pin them to into a box and send them to Oregon, identify them to the best of our ability, and send them to Oregon State. And they catalog the bees and collect that data so that they can use it for research and for us to see what bees are in Mosier Plateau on our land trust properties.
That's really interesting. The difference between Oregon and Montana, as you just described it, that we don't have the baseline collection to compare something to. And I'm thinking of the Pacific Northwest Bumblebee Atlas, which is still ongoing. The citizen science element of it is a little bit different because you adopt a grid and go out and peruse that, and you don't have to bring anything back. You just take pictures and make documentation. But that's really interesting. So it sounds like Friends has this way of bringing together outdoor recreation and hiking, perhaps with people who are interested in conservation and wanting to participate in your project.
Totally, yes. And it's really nice to share our landscapes with others and scientists and conservationists alike, because like, for example, like I was just saying, Moser Plateau, it has this incredibly diverse wildflower meadow that it provides a different landscape and different species for Oregon Bee Atlas collectors to discover the biodiversity of Oregon in the Gorge specifically, because there's not a ton of people out here. So organizing as many Oregon Bee Atlas people as possible to collect as many bees as possible in the Gorge helps their data, because everyone's getting data in Eugene and Portland, but they need some stuff in
fewer folks
Gorge.
out here. Yeah. Well, sorry. Yeah, so this I love bee talk. This is kind of outside my frame of reference, mostly just dealing with the question of honeybees and I was thinking about you asked me a question over email as far as like why they're important in the Gorge. And if you just drive into the Gorge, or if you live here, if you're out walking around, it's pretty easy to take into account why we need pollinators. When you look at the cherry orchards and the apple and pear orchards and blueberry patches and the blackberry patches in everyone's gardens. And so I think that honeybees are a pretty accessible way for your average person to understand to start to understand the interconnections among the insects and plants and humans in the Gorge, which is why I think, and everywhere, which is why I think people have become so interested in honeybees of late.
Yeah, totally. I saw in one of your interviews, you were writing about, or you were asked about what you do personally to increase the biodiversity, because of course the biodiversity of bees is important, because a lot of bees specialize on specific flowers or specific plants, and without them, these plants would not be pollinated as successfully. So the more biodiversity we have in our plants, the more biodiversity we have in our bees, and vice versa. But I saw you were talking about what people can do for biodiversity and for the bees specifically. And I saw you were talking about planting native flowers and leaving your yard a little bit not as tidy as everyone does.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, the honeybees forage up to 3 miles away from their hives for nectar. So I know around here, I live quite close to the Indian Creek Trail. So I know that they're down in the blackberry blossoms down there. They get a lot of nectar from trees. So when you're walking around the Heights neighborhood, you can hear them in the trees. And don't ask me what kind of trees they are. I'm not a tree person, but it's once you start listening, you realize that all these, well, like take maple trees, for example. They have little tiny blossoms in the spring that you wouldn't know about. So, but in my own yard, I do like to make sure to plant lots of bee-friendly flowers like borage and lavender and blanket flower and things like that. And one thing I've talked with people about recently, when you mentioned keeping your yard a little bit messy, you're just leaving areas where for bees to rest, like to alight and to and for water to gather, so that you're providing them with drinking water. So, and I have what my husband and I refer to as the Great Dandelion Compromise, because he's one of those guys who really likes a lawn. So we have quite a lot of our space is native plants, but there's a big swath of green. And when I first got into honeybees, the first year I went out there and I saw him, with his dandelion poison, going around the yard and like an ad from Ace Hardware or something. And I was like, hey, hang on a second. You don't understand. Number one, poison is bad, but also like dandelions are superfood for honeybees in the spring. It's like the first protein. So you got to not do that. And so he promised to stop using pesticides on the dandelions as long as I promised to go dig them up by hand once they'd finished blooming. So that's how we've worked it out. And that's just my suggestion for people who are banging heads over the dandelion problem.
Mm-hmm. That's a good suggestion. I like that. Yeah, I think that that's so important, because honeybees and native bees, they protect the biodiversity, our food, our water, ultimately, by keeping our forests healthy and stable, so that we're not having runoff, and you know, really everything. They're just connecting ecosystem services we just don't think about. I invite people to, next time they go on a hike or go outside and there's flowers around, you don't normally look, but just stop and sit by a flower or like an area with flowers and just notice that it's like a whole other world going on that you might not normally notice. It's amazing. You'll see all kinds of different kinds of bees and other pollinators, and hopefully you'll learn something about how important our bees are. So I think that is most of the time we have, Eileen. I'm so glad that we had you. And will you tell us again about where to find your book and its name?
Sure, yeah, I'll even show it to you. It's called The Music of Bees.
Beautiful.
And it is, you can buy it anywhere you buy books. And there's also an audiobook and an ebook. And if you're in Hood River and go to Waukoma Bookstore, you can get a signed copy.
Oh, wow. Did you say Waukoma Bookstore?
Yeah, Waukoma Bookstore.
Oh, yeah. Awesome. That's so awesome. Well, thanks so much, Eileen. It was so nice talking to you.
Thanks so much for having me. Great talking with you too.
Yeah. Happy Biodiversity Week.
Happy World Bee Day.